All right, let's dive into a section of an ancient sermon, Hebrews chapter 10, that is just an absolute masterclass in persuasion. We're going to lean on Dr. David deSilva's analysis here to see how the author uses this powerful blend of argument and emotion to hold a community together right at the very moment it was tempted to just fall apart.
I mean, think about it. It's a question we can all relate to, right? Imagine everything you believe in suddenly starts making your life incredibly, incredibly difficult. Where do you find the strength to hold on? Well, that is the exact problem the author of Hebrews is tackling head-on.
So let's get a picture of what's going on here. The people listening to this sermon weren't dealing with some hypothetical problem. No, this was real. They were facing real social hostility, real marginalization. Their neighbors were shunning them. Their public life was basically drying up, and you can just imagine some of them starting to think, maybe it's just easier to quietly fade back, to just shrink back.
Now, the author's first move here is just brilliant. Instead of starting with a scolding, which you might expect, he starts with this powerful, positive invitation. He doesn't say, you better do this. He says, hey, look at what's already been done for you. Look at the incredible access you have right now.
And the key word here is boldness, or paresia in the original Greek. And this isn't just about being brave. It's describing a completely new reality, a confident, direct, unprecedented kind of access right into the very presence of God. I mean, this was something unimaginable before, and now it's possible because of what Jesus did.
So, what are you supposed to do with this incredible new access? Well, the author gives 3 really clear calls to action. First, let us draw near, the opposite of shrinking back. Second, let us hold unwavering to your hope. And third, and this is so vital for a community, let us consider one another.
And this quote just nails what that third point really means. Dr. deSilva points out that a lot of translations will say, provoke one another, but the original Greek is so much more empathetic. It's a call to truly see each other, to actually notice the struggles, to pay attention to the challenges. Because that kind of deep observation, well, that's where authentic love and care are born. And then just as quickly as he extended that warm invitation, the author pivots hard. Now comes a stark, sobering warning. He's about to lay out the terrifying consequences for anyone who would treat this amazing gift with contempt and just walk away.
Now, this is so important. When he warns about willful sin, we have to understand what he means. He is not talking about our everyday struggles or failures. He's talking about one specific, high-handed act, the conscious, intentional decision to abandon the community, to defect, to basically say, this whole thing isn't worth the trouble. And for that, he says, there's no sacrifice left.
He frames this act of defection in the bluntest terms possible. It's not just leaving a group, it's a deeply personal, threefold assault on God's honor. It's like trampling the Son of God underfoot, treating his sacrifice as if it's common or worthless, and directly insulting the very spirit of grace that offered this gift in the first place. It is the ultimate act of ingratitude.
And this right here is the chilling climax of the entire warning. The author makes it crystal clear that all the rejection and harassment they're getting from their neighbors, that is absolutely nothing compared to the judgment they would face from the divine benefactor they just spurned. But he doesn't leave them there stewing in fear. No way. From that terrifying warning, he immediately shifts to powerful encouragement, calling them to look back at their own history and reminding them of the strength they have already shown. I absolutely love this reframing. He takes their past experiences of abuse and getting marginalized, and he gives them a new name. He says it wasn't just victimization. It was a great contest, like an athletic competition. By enduring, they were competing for honor, not just passively taking a beating. And he gives them 2 very specific examples, proof of how they showed their strength in that contest. First, he says, you showed sympathy for those who were thrown in prison. And second, when your own property was seized, you accepted it with joy, because you knew you had a better, more lasting possession waiting for you. Okay, this part is just pure pastoral genius. We see how the author masterfully uses scripture to make his case. He takes this passage from the prophet Habakkuk, and by cleverly rearranging a clause from the Greek translation, he basically remixes it to speak directly to his audience's current crisis.
And this is the result of that brilliant little edit. The ancient scripture now presents his listeners with a very clear binary choice, a fork in the road. There are only 2 paths, the path of faith, which leads to life, and the path of shrinking back, which leads to destruction. The choice, he's saying, is yours.
So, when you put it all together, what you have is just a stunning piece of rhetoric. It's incredible.
The author isn't just making one single argument. He's weaving together multiple appeals to create this airtight, compelling case for why they need to persevere.
He just masterfully blends these three key appeals. He builds up their confidence by reminding them of this amazing, privileged access they have to God. Then he uses fear to show them the absolutely appalling nature of turning away. And finally, he appeals to their own shared history of endurance to prove, hey, you've got what it takes to finish this race.
You see, this entire section serves a really critical purpose. It perfectly sets up what's coming next, the famous Hall of Faith in Hebrews chapter 11. Having established that the righteous live by faith and not by shrinking back, he is now ready to show them a whole cloud of witnesses who did just that.
And it really leaves us with a powerful question for ourselves, doesn't it? This ancient author urged his community to have parrhesia, a confident boldness, in the face of immense pressure to just be silent and conform. So what does that same kind of courageous, confident boldness look like for us, in our own lives today?